Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of the lobster fishermen and women in Charlotte County, for working families in St. John West, truck drivers running our highways, pensioners throughout New Brunswick Southwest, and every small business owner hanging on for help. These Canadians look to Parliament and wonder if those entrusted to govern understand the difficulties families and pensioners face every single day. They are fed up with a government that, because it printed money and devalued family savings while driving up prices, especially home prices. They are exhausted because they are working harder and falling further behind. They are tired of a federal government that costs us too much, taxes too much, and delivers too little year after year. They are dumbfounded being told to tighten their belts and to sacrifice more after years of sacrifices, while the federal government adds another $78 billion to our debt this year alone. That works out to $5,400 more debt for each Canadian household. My constituents are the people who pay the bills of this government, as well as the bone-crushing debt on government spending. They work hard, follow the rules, and in return seek the dignity of keeping what they earn and the opportunity to build a financially secure life in safe communities. Households in my riding are not asking for more government bureaucrats to manage the economy. They're asking for a government that respects the value of a paycheck and spends our money wisely. They're crying out for change. When the Prime Minister entered office, he promised fiscal discipline. He promised a steady hand to make things better. Some of my constituents even believed Liberals would not be more of the same after the last federal election. Yet it is obvious from the budget those hopes have been dashed. The Liberals, under so-called new leadership, have nearly doubled the $42 billion deficit forecast by Justin Trudeau. We can now all see the new boss is just like the old boss, but even more expensive. Today's $78 billion deficit is the largest in Canadian history outside of war or the pandemic. It's the most expensive government. This is the most expensive government in history, and Canadians have never received less from it. Our nation is on the wrong path. The Prime Minister is adding $10 million in debt every hour and placing the burden of today's spending on the backs of our children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. Canadians want the next generation to inherit a Canada where hard work is rewarded, where you can build a life, afford a home, and have confidence in the future. The reality is, after a Liberal decade of lost opportunity, Canada is a less prosperous nation, less safe, and more costly. It's a place where the dream of home ownership is now an impossible, costly nightmare. Many of us remember or understand from recent history what happens when government spends wildly beyond its means. Before we hit the fiscal wall, economic growth falls. Families struggle and life becomes harder. This budget keeps Canada barreling down Justin Trudeau's road to debt-fueled economic ruin. It's the road to serfdom. The national debt now stands at almost $1.35 trillion. What do Canadians receive from this vast sum that is impossible to understand that is so large? Do we see more doctors and nurses in our hospitals? More homes being built? More affordable food? Stronger paycheck? No, none of this. Yet a newborn in Canada now begins life with a $32,000 debt thanks to the Liberals. The government of Canada is now drowning in red ink and will spend $55 billion on debt interest payments every single year. What's astonishing is this amount, $55 billion, is more than what Ottawa transfers to the provinces for health care every single year. $55 billion in debt interest is also more than what Ottawa collects in GST revenue each year. So this means every dollar that Canadians pay in GST, HST to Ottawa now goes to bankers and bondholders instead of social programs and federal programs. This is the direct cost of Liberal recklessness. The GST, HST revenue goes entirely to fund debt, not to help social programs or the government to help Canadians get ahead. Meanwhile, food prices continue to rise thanks to failing Liberal policies. For example, spending $800 million and likely double that amount on a useless gun confiscation program that targets law-abiding firearm owners is a priority. Here's an idea. If the government were to eliminate this program outright, it would cut the federal deficit this year by 1%. So there we go. We need 99 other ideas to get rid of this deficit altogether. There's one. If we got Brookfield to pay its taxes, there'd be a few more $1 billion. We can eliminate the deficit if we're smart about it. And this program, this gun grant program, is just one example of misplaced Liberal priorities at a time when families that earn 2 paychecks are skipping meals. Seniors are choosing between heating, eating, and buying medicine. 2.2 million Canadians use a food bank monthly, and 1 in 5 people using a food bank work full-time but still cannot afford basic groceries. This is the Canada today under Liberal management. It is time for a change. Young Canadians who should be building their lives are instead delaying marriage, delaying children, delaying a home ownership, delaying their futures. But not because they lack effort or ambition, but because they no longer see a path forward in their own country. The Liberal solution to this self-created Liberal mess, and the Liberal answer to every question, is always more government, more red tape, and more debt. Canada can choose another path, a path that builds and rewards work, a path that makes home ownership achievable again, a path where government lives within its means so families can live within theirs. This is the promise Conservatives are offering. This is why Conservatives moved an amendment to this budget, to fix its flaws, to get Canada's fiscal house in order, and to move Canada again, finally, after 10 years. Because now is not the time to try to repeat what's already failed and will fail again. We're a country rich in resources, talent, and possibility, but we cannot continue down a path where government buries us deeper in debt as Canadians grow poorer. This is why I cannot support this budget as it stands today, why Conservatives will not support this budget. It is why Conservatives will continue working to restore the promise of this country for families who work hard, play by the rules, and simply want a fair chance. But that won't happen with this budget. It never has, it never will under 10 years of Liberal rule, and that is why we need change, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Here, here.
Comments, questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Madawaska-Restigouche.
Président, j'aimerais remercier mon collègue du Nouveau-Brunswick pour son discours et je suis certain qu'il a tout autant à cœur que moi le développement économique de notre belle province. Au Nouveau-Brunswick, on retrouve 21 des 34 minéraux critiques identifiés au Canada et dans le budget 2025, on prévoit justement un investissement de 2 milliards sur 5 ans pour mettre en place le Fonds pour l'infrastructure des minéraux critiques qui va permettre d'investir dans des projets des entreprises liées à ces minéraux essentiels. Est-ce que mon collègue partage mon opinion qu'il s'agit d'une excellente nouvelle avec beaucoup de potentiel pour notre province? Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The honourable member for St. John, St. Croix.
Ça fait longtemps que moi, j'étais quelqu'un qui, ici au Parlement, qui dit oui, il faut avancer nos ressources naturelles. Mais présentement, c'est le gouvernement du Nouveau-Brunswick, gouverné par les libéraux provinciaux, qui demande à ce gouvernement de faire quelque chose pour avancer ces projets très importants. Puis jusqu'à date, ils n'ont fait rien. Alors oui, c'est le temps de faire quelque chose pour notre province, parce que juste à date, notre Premier ministre a dit non à tous les projets qui viennent du Nouveau-Brunswick.
Questions and comments. Question et commentaire. L'honorable député de Shefford.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Autre grande déception et grand oublié de ce budget, c'est la question de la santé avec les transferts en santé. Le gouvernement se vante d'avoir investi pour des infrastructures d'hôpital, Monsieur le Président. Donc, ma question, pour le collègue à qui je remercie pour son discours. J'étais avec des gens du système de la santé cette semaine après le budget et qui m'ont dit c'est bien beau construire des hôpitaux, mais si on ne transfère pas les fonds pour qu'il y ait des gens qui travaillent dans le système de santé pour être capable de payer le personnel, pour être capable de payer la recherche, d'homologuer les médicaments, bien, Monsieur le Président, c'est un beau coup d'épée dans le dos. Alors, qu'est-ce que mon collègue a à répondre à ces gens du système de la santé? Comme quoi, c'est bien beau l'hospitalocentrisme, à un moment donné, il faut aussi du monde puis en prendre soin.
The honourable member for St. John, St. Croix.
Oui, merci beaucoup pour cette question. Écoute, pour gouverner le Canada, il faut choisir. Et je suis totalement d'accord. On a vu sous le gouvernement Stephen Harper, l'ancien gouvernement conservateur, que chaque année, les dépenses, les transferts pour la santé ont augmenté. Et pour nous, les conservateurs, ça sera toujours une priorité pour nous. Mais ça veut dire qu'il faut trouver des dépenses ailleurs qui ne sont pas des priorités. Ça, c'est quelque chose que nous pouvons faire, mais pas les libéraux, et c'est pourquoi on a besoin du changement pour du bon.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Red Deer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Liberal budget proves that this Prime Minister is just the same, if not worse than Justin Trudeau, adding more government bloat with another $321.7 billion to the federal debt over the next 5 years. Through you, Speaker, I'd like to ask my colleague, how can Canadians trust anything this Liberal government is doing with their hard-earned tax dollars?
Member for St. John, St. Croix.
Well, look, we can trust them to do more of the same, and that record is going to be a record of failure. I had hoped the other day when the finance minister tabled his budget, looked up in the gallery and we saw Mr. Chrétien. 30 years ago, the Liberals had a problem with too much debt, too much spending, and slow growth. What do? They moved to go through expenditure review, cut needless, wasteful, duplicate spending. They balanced the budget in 3 years, and guess what happened? It turbocharged the Canadian economy. That is what this country needs to do again. Instead, under this Prime Minister, we are seeing the exact same playbook as the last Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. We've had 10 years of slow, anemic growth. We need to turn it around. That will happen by getting our house in order, our fiscal house in order, lowering taxes, and getting out of the way so the private sector will build the homes, create the jobs that pay the paychecks that will get this country moving again.
Question et commentaire, l'honorable député de Thérèse de Blainville.
Président, j'aimerais rappeler que le ratio dette nette du PIB est le plus bas du G7, donc ce qui nous permet d'avoir une saine gestion pour investir. Alors ma question, c'est à l'honorable collègue, c'est êtes-vous favorable à la super déduction à la productivité, un ensemble d'incitatifs fiscaux améliorés couvrant tous les nouveaux investissements en capital qui permettent aux entreprises de déduire immédiatement une plus grande partie du coût de ces investissements et ainsi contribuer à une économie forte?
L'honorable député de St. John, St. Croix.
I believe in tax cuts anytime, anywhere for Canadians. But I don't just believe in tax cuts for businesses. This budget is a failure because it fails to deal with the affordability crisis that is hurting working families, young families, and pensioners. So it's all well and good to talk about the debt-to-GDP ratio, which this government has broken. For the last 10 years, they promised to keep lowering it, and in fact, this budget sends it up, breaking again another of the Prime Minister's promise. So yes, I support tax relief to make sure this country is competitive, but I also want to ensure the federal government is doing something to bring down the cost of families. It has not done it, and that's why this budget's a failure.